talk about whatever I want on here. And today we're going to be talking about Lilly Singh, but we're not just rehashing all of the things that people have already said about her. Well, kind of, we are in a way. This is a commentary about the commentary of Lilly Singh. We're going to dive way deeper. We're talking about representation. We're talking about allyship again. We're talking about anti-blackness. We're talking about a lot of things today. So strap in, I guess. So besides Lilly Singh, our other main player today is just the YouTube community in general. More specifically, like the commentary genre of the YouTube community. Now, community has become kind of like this nebulous word with the internet and everything. The general definition of community is just grouping people that happen to have like a common characteristic, or they all live in the same place. I mean, that's very general. Like, everyone with brown hair, go stand in this room. It's like, is that a community? Not necessarily, but that is one of the definitions of community. You know, everyone who lives in your city, you're all part of that city's community, even though within that city, there's different neighborhoods and stuff that have their own sense of community as well. So then there's also the second definition of community, where it's more of like an active choice. You're not just being grouped by some characteristic that you share with a bunch of people. You're choosing to be involved in this community based on common values, goals, cultural, like, things that you value, I guess, values, cultural values, there we go. So it's like the difference between just being a fan of someone's music and then being part of, like, you know, like being a fan of Rihanna or being Rihanna Navy, like hardcore stan type of affiliation. Stan culture, I guess, is a little bit more of that sense of community, although there's a huge asterisk with that, than just you being a fan of someone's music. Just because someone else is also a fan of Rihanna's music doesn't necessarily mean that you feel in community with them. So one requires effort and is more of a choice. The other just kind of is. It's maybe even be something that's placed upon you sometimes as well. One of them, the second definition, requires a sense of mutuality. So then what is the YouTube community? Is it just a collection of people who have a YouTube channel? Because then that would include so many people. It would include like Enrique in Spain making videos about bicycles or something. I don't know. Like, just because I make YouTube videos and that person across the world makes YouTube videos does not mean that we're in the same community. We just have this similar hobby, I guess. I don't know. While the ecosystem of YouTube does, in a sense, like create community just by its existence, when it comes to YouTubers being in community with each other, that's where things get a little bit more complicated. So you do have your genre groupings too. There's also sub-communities within those genres. So you have these little branches off into these sub-communities where things are a little bit more of a give and take. There's a little bit more expectation, a little bit more of a relationship there. So like with commentary, there's a ton of subgenres with that. You have like the drama tea channels, you have BreadTube, you have whatever this is. Even then, within those subgenres, you still have people who don't get along, are ideologically opposed, but I think that's fine as well. Through the experiences that I've had online, I don't think that a true sense of community, in that second definition, that ideal sense of community, can be found specifically and only online. I'm sure there are amazing online-only communities that do exist out there, really like niche ones where everyone is in community with each other, they support each other. It's a very positive environment for them. Maybe that's some of the only sense of community that they get because where they're living and the situation that they happen to be in real life, they don't have access to any of that like in person. So that online sense of community really is important and it is a good thing for their life. But I just haven't been a part of those communities and I feel like that's like the exception to the rule. And on YouTube specifically, I feel like there's very particular barriers when it comes to creating a sense of community that doesn't necessarily exist on other platforms. YouTube is like the inventor of parasocial behavior. I mean, not really, but it's definitely a huge contributor, I would say. And I think the parasocial nature of community is on YouTube makes it so that that second definition, that true sense of community, is not something that can necessarily be found. We may call the viewers of a creator, the fans of a creator, that creator's community, but is that creator in community with those people? Can they be? I personally don't think so because of that parasocial dynamic. And one of the hills that I will die on is that the internet is real life. So many people say the internet's not even real. But like, this is not some weird virtual reality thing that we hop into where everything's made up and the points don't matter. Like, we're real people having real interactions with other real people. Sometimes we might be arguing with Russian bots or whatever, but there are a lot of real people that we're interacting with on a daily basis online. Our words and actions have real world consequences, more so now than they did in the beginnings of like social media and the internet, but that potential was always there. I've grown up my entire life saying or hearing that the things that you put online are going to be there forever. I saw like the invention of social media and saw how that grew into like mainstream, and it's just a normal part of everyone's life on an everyday basis. So that was even before we knew about social media and just how big of a part it would be of our lives. Those warnings were in place. So like those consequences have always been there, even if they're just like, we hear about them more now. And especially with anonymity online, which used to be like a huge thing in the beginning, but using your real name and everything became more popular as Facebook got more popular. It just became normalized to start using your real name instead of using like a pseudonym or a username. But I will give it to you that there is kind of like this fog or something that permeates the internet that does make it a little unreal. Like, yes, I am a real person, you're a real person watching this, and if we were to have an interaction, we would be affecting each other on a real level, but there is still a sense of being able to step away from that. If I wanted to, I would never have to interact with you again, vice versa as well, whereas things in person are a little bit different. And then another major factor that is a barrier to forming that true sense of community on YouTube is the individualistic nature of the platform. And it's literally in the name, YouTube, and the original tagline was broadcast yourself. It's always been very me centered. If you saw my last video, I talked about how TikTok has revolutionized social media and has given pretty much everybody a platform, or at least the ability to gain one. YouTube did that first, though. YouTube has permanently changed entertainment, among a lot of other things culturally. YouTube was the first to give everyday people the ability to broadcast themselves, funnily enough, and completely removing those long-standing barriers in like the mainstream, what's the word I'm looking for? Institution, I guess, of mainstream media. But at the beginning, in the early days, we didn't know that YouTube would kind of become this stepping stone or would have more of a connection to mainstream media. It was seen as an alternative, kind of. We didn't know that there would be pathways to break into the mainstream.
When you see something like YouTube, you're like, oh, so I can do this from my house. I could do this on the side. I could learn how to do this myself, and I can not have to go through 10 gatekeepers. Like, that changes the game. That's why YouTube did change the game. Because I can say if YouTube didn't exist, chances of me going that route, slim to none.
So Lilly Singh started YouTube in 2010, which is when a ton of creators who would become some of the biggest on the platform, that was around the time they were getting their start. And 2010 YouTube is the YouTube that a lot of people refer to when they talk about OG YouTube. But, you know, if you're a true OG like me, been on the platform since 2005, 2006, probably more 2006 for me personally, then you know that there's true OGs that even paved the way for that 2010 wave, and then the popularity that increased through the 2010s to even happen in the first place. Like, if your fave did not ask their audience to rate 5 stars, are they an OG? I personally don't think so, but maybe I'm being a little snobby. I don't know. Yeah, I've been watching YouTube for forever, and so I just really love the platform, and I think I like making these kinds of videos because I can draw on a lot of my own experiences and thoughts and stuff that I've had, and I've watched things grow and stuff like that. So yeah, I just hope that comes across. I don't know. So anyway, to put this time period into perspective, Jenna Marbles is releasing How to Trick People into Thinking That You're Good Looking in actually July of 2010.
And welcome to my tutorial on how to trick people into thinking you're really good looking.
And, oh God, I remember finding that video on Tumblr, and that's how I discovered Jenna Marbles in 2010. Like, wow, what a time to be alive. That was so long ago, but it literally feels like not that long ago kind of as well. So seeing that the YouTube landscape didn't have anybody that looked like her yet, Lilly decided to try her hand at making her own videos. And similarly to Jenna's older days, Lilly had some similar qualities to the content that she was making, and a lot of YouTubers did at that time, like playing multiple characters, using a webcam. A sketch comedy was super popular in the early days of YouTube. And I would also argue that Lilly paved the way for that sketch, highly controversial, very polarizing type of mature, but also kid-targeted content that Liza Koshy would go on to do and Lele Pons would go on to do with Vine and After Vine and all of that. Lilly was kind of like the first of that kind of content. I think she was definitely a pioneer in that genre. So Lilly gains a huge audience, very supportive audience, reaches massive success all through the 2010s. And she's going to follow the path that a lot of these big YouTubers would follow. And that is just kind of skyrocketing into success and also barreling into the mainstream as well. Because YouTube was also rapidly gaining popularity through the 2010s. And so YouTube was becoming very attractive to mainstream entertainment and also just advertisers in general. One of those mainstream entertainment brands was Legacy Network. I was gonna say Media Network, but I feel like that's an oxymoron or something. I don't know. NBC. Actually, NBC and YouTube go way back because one of the first viral videos on the platform is Lazy Sunday, which is a SNL clip with Chris Parnell and Andy Samberg. This is pre-Lonely Island. And actually somebody that wasn't associated with NBC at all uploaded it. It was just some random person or something uploading it illegally. And it became, one of the first viral videos on the platform, which I think also ended up getting taken down. And then NBC later, because YouTube and NBC and all these other late night and YouTube do have kind of a special relationship because late night shows post their clips on YouTube. They do really well. And I think it helps them maintain an audience that isn't the one that's going to watch your show on TV as it's happening. So they, it came full circle, and NBC ended up uploading Lazy Sunday in like 2013 or something like that, like later down the line. The Chronic. What Calls of Narnia? So Lilly eventually moved to Hollywood as she's becoming more successful. But then getting into traditional media, she would be in movies like Bad Moms and like one of the Ice Age movies. I only saw the first one, so I don't even know how many there are, but she did a voice in that. And then eventually through her connections, she lands a pilot with NBC that didn't actually end up going through, but NBC liked her. They wanted to work with her. And so later when the opportunity came to pick up this late night slot, they eventually said, hey, maybe we should ask Lilly. And I think NBC saw Lilly as a way to gain representation points because, that is something that has been increasingly popular as the 2010s would come to a close and into the 2020s. This is probably about 2019, maybe even 2018 when they asked her, because I don't know when exactly they started filming and planning and everything. And initially Lilly declined because she wasn't really connected to late night in general, just like wasn't a part of her experience growing up.
Yeah. A lot of people ask me, growing up, not seeing yourself on TV, was that what motivated you to then put yourself on screen? And the answer is, truthfully, as a young kid, I did not have that capacity of thought. Like as a young kid, and this is even sadder reality, is watching TV, seeing majority white people or black people on my TV screen. I just thought that was for a reason. I was like, oh, this is just the way it is. Yeah. I didn't ever question because I didn't think it was an option. Even when I got my late night show, did you want to do this because all the other late night hosts look a different way growing up? And I was like, well, my parents never watched late night because the people didn't look like them. So I just never thought it was an option.
And I think her point about not even realizing that someone like her could be on TV is an experience that like a lot of marginalized people have. Representation is important because it allows people to see themselves in places that they might not have even ever thought that they could be in. It allows them to dream things that they didn't even know were possible to dream. And seeing somebody who looks like you doing something that you didn't think was possible is something that's very empowering. But it is something that tends to be romanticized, just the idea of representation in general. Then no one really talks about the realities of those people who are doing the representing and the barriers that they have to try to break through and all of the obstacles that they face in doing that. You're attempting to break these boundaries, but you aren't necessarily equipped with the tools to do so. So enticed by this opportunity to pave the way for others and to make a difference and to be this much needed voice in this genre of entertainment, Lilly eventually accepts.
So when I got the call about the late night show, And I want you to know also my answer was not a yes right away. I took a long time to think about it. They had to actually call me back to be like, so what's your answer? Because I was just like, do I want to do this? The thing that pushed me over the edge to do it was the opportunity to do something historic and try to just chip away at that path I was trying to pave. And I found that to be important because if I said no, they might ask someone else who doesn't look like me. And then that would have been a lost opportunity.
So A Little Late with Lilly Singh actually premiered in fall of 2019, September, I think. And the reaction was pretty much immediately overwhelmingly negative. I think even when it was announced, it was like immediately met with criticism. In researching this video, I probably could have memorized her opening monologue in that first episode because of how much people commented on it and how much people had to say about it. And I have to say, while researching this video, I could have sworn that this happened in like 2013 because I had to like keep reminding myself that like this was 2019, 2020, those years, because just some of the things that people were saying that we all thought was perfectly normal and valid and like didn't need critique is kind of shocking to me now looking back. And so I definitely want to share that with you so we can watch this stuff together. But I'm making a vow to you right here on this day that I will never be one to sit here and react to obviously bad faith, bigoted commentary channels, even if it's like not necessarily explicitly so, like if they try to play it off as if it's not bigoted or whatever, because I just don't see that as productive at all. Like me and the quartering are probably never going to agree on anything except for hopefully like things like murder is bad, you know, just those general things that I think most people can agree upon. But outside of that, like we're never gonna agree, so there's just not really a point for me to get on here and like debunk a bunch of Brie Larson videos. What purpose is that serving? To me, I don't think it serves one, and it feels like a waste of time. And that's just not the audience that I'm making videos for. I'm not here to prove myself to people who don't really want to listen to me. My purpose is to get people to think deeper about things and just become better because, you know, that's what I've had to do in life and what I continue to try to do. And so, yeah, I think reflective commentary is more important, serves a better purpose than just going for the easy stuff to comment on. So unless I have to do a deep dive into like someone specific, like the quartering, I don't know why I would have to. I'm not really ever going to even discuss obviously bad faith, like unreasonable, what I consider unreasonable. And I hope like the type of commentary that I'm talking about is evident to you, like you know what I'm talking about. That's just not really something that I'm ever going to acknowledge. There is plenty of that to parse through when it comes to Lilly's show and the criticism surrounding it. There definitely was a large amount of people in that space talking about it. That's not what I'm here to talk about today. What I'm going to be responding to is channels that I've watched, that I do watch, that I consider to be reasonable and left-leaning probably, if not just, you know, just a normal, rational, reasonable person, whose content that I have enjoyed, just that happened to really surprise me that it was made in 2019 or 2020. So the idea for this video started when Anthony Padilla interviewed Lilly Singh on his show, and she talked about the show and the backlash, and it was the first time that I heard an alternate perspective of that time period. I hadn't even thought about that in a very long time. And then life happened, Christy Carlson Romano happened, so this was on the back burner for a while. But in September, I tweeted that I was watching a Jay Aubrey video about this situation that was really, really shocking to me. And now I'm just finally excited to show you what I was talking about. So I don't know, if you're out there and you remember me tweeting about that, here's what I was talking about. And his video specifically is what I'm gonna focus on most, just because I feel like it is most emblematic of a lot of the criticisms that were happening at the time. And also it was being propped up as a form of constructive and good criticism. There's a screenshot of Eddie Burback, I think, replying to Lilly Singh saying like, oh, are you talking about the Jay Aubrey video? Because it's actually constructive. And I don't remember what he said exactly. And that screenshot I think I saw in the Right Opinions video about the subject. So I don't even have that screenshot here. But what I'm saying is that like people in the YouTube community even people that I follow, Eddie Burback, like people that I think are reasonable and stuff like that, who I probably agree with a lot politically, were propping up this video. And so I want us to look back at it and examine why, or examine if that was a good idea in the first place. And I mean, I guess you can say that like summer of 2020 was when this reckoning happened and a lot of people were realizing the microaggressions they've been doing and like all these other things people were like becoming aware of. And for some people, the first time in their lives this was happening. So maybe I don't want to be like too much when it comes to content previous to that, but I feel like even in 2019, a lot of these things that I'm going to show you were still weird to say. So if you saw this video, this J. Aubrey video about Lilly Singh that came out at the time in 2019, if you for some reason have a memory of that in your head, can you remember what you thought of that video? Did you like it? Did you think it was a great, like, it really summarized the criticism very well? Like, I have this cat like, if you can remember what you felt, recall those feelings. And then when we dive into it, we're gonna have a chance to reflect on our feelings from the past. So I guess I don't really know much about J. Aubrey as a person. I watch his videos often. I'm subscribed. I know he's a friend of the Hasanabi broadcast, so he has to be somewhat reasonable and not a weird reactionary douche. And a lot of his other videos, like politically, like he has takes that I do agree with, but maybe he was different in 2019 and this was like popular sentiment at the time. Maybe this is just a blind spot that we've all had, but yeah, I don't know. So the first thing I want to talk about is he starts with a video making digs at Lilly's username.
Lilly started her YouTube channel I Superwoman in October of 2010. And in all my years of following YouTubers, I still have no idea why there's an I before and after her name. It looks terrible, Lilly. I hate to break the news.
How old is J. Aubrey? Let me see. I have my computer in my lap. Let me see if Google will tell me how old J. Aubrey is. Jonathan Aubrey, born in 1997 or 1999. I can't read apparently. So he's 24. Is he that young where he doesn't understand usernames? So what you're telling me, bro, is through all your years of covering YouTubers, you don't get usernames? So for the children out there who don't understand, let me tell you about usernames. So YouTube used to have, and actually it is kind of making a comeback, but it used to have usernames only. There weren't any display names. So you know how on TikTok you have your @ but then you also can change like the display name of your thing, that you can also do that on Twitter. And now you can do that on YouTube. There's @ on YouTube again. It used to be where just that @ was the only thing that you had. So if somebody, like, let's say I'm Good Mythical Morning and I want that @ for my show. If somebody already has that @ I have to call my show something else. And then Good Mythical Morning just does not exist. So that was something that did eventually change though. So Superwoman is just like a typical cringe millennial username that you use because you want it to be as close to not having to have those X's we used to use, underscores, things like that. Remember, like, am I crazy? Do we remember this? Like, and also, do the kids not remember when YouTube made you turn your account into a Google Plus account so that you could comment? Maybe I'm just old and I've been on this website for way too many hours of my life, but this was like 2013, I think, when they finally changed it so that you could change your name on YouTube. Yeah, I think that was like 2013 when that happened. When that happened, after the Google Plus integration, you could change your display name. A lot of people who had their cringy usernames from before changed to Andrea Russet. That's a really good example of someone who had a cringe username and had to change their display name. Some people did this as soon as the option was available, like right in like 2013, 2012, maybe even when that happened. But then Lilly was a little bit of a later adopter. A lot of YouTubers were kind of, I think, afraid of their branding if they changed it. But by the time J. Aubrey made his video in 2019, her name on YouTube also had already been changed for over a year. So I know you're making a joke. And I promise this is the pettiest thing that I have to complain about this video. I just thought it was really funny and it made me feel old, like I said. Yeah, it's like a joke or whatever. I'm the kind of annoying person where if there's like little factual inconsistencies, I don't think it's funny. But if you're going to pass off, and your friends on Twitter are going to pass off your video as being constructive criticism and all of that, then You probably shouldn't have this disrespectful and factually ignorant diss at the beginning of your video about Lilly if you want your constructive criticism to be heard. I would argue that a lot of this video is not constructive criticism, but we're gonna get into that. And you don't have to be nice when critiquing something, by the way. I don't think that that's necessarily what I'm asking. But also, if you're going to be a little bit snarky in your critique, can you be surprised when somebody is only going to focus on your tone and not the actual critique that you're saying? It's like a cop-out that people love to do. So you can't have it both ways. Are you making a snarky video about Lilly for your audience and for people to watch because it was trendy at the time? Or are you making this constructive piece that you think is beneficial to Lilly? Because you can't have it both ways, especially when you have this as the intro of your video, in my opinion.
As much as I rail on YouTube, they actually do offer a lot of opportunities for women and minorities in entertainment, because success is primarily curated by the viewer. There's already an overwhelming number of stunningly successful women on YouTube, and just because none of them made it onto Forbes' top 10 list of 2018 doesn't mean they aren't making more money than most people will ever see in their lives. Whether she's going after racist white guys in her comment section or the patriarchal undertones of this very website, this sort of fake moral grandstanding doesn't tend to sit well with a lot of people. So when she announced her new NBC late night show in early 2019, it wasn't pretty.
So first off, like I said earlier, YouTube definitely has done a lot for people who would have never been able to have a voice if we were just relying on traditional media. But how much of that can be accredited to the platform specifically versus the user base and the creators who have turned the platform into what it is? Like most major websites that use their algorithm to push content, to sell things, YouTube has been criticized for algorithm biases that all algorithms can have. It's a real phenomenon. Because we live in a racist society, for example, algorithms are going to have these little racist quirks about them. On YouTube, Cornbread Tube grew out of a need to have Black voices in the commentary community, especially because BreadTube, LeftTube, talking about social issues, a lot of them are white and a lot of them do not have direct interactions with the social issues that they're talking about. And so that's why having these different voices are extremely important. But Cornbread Tube creators are not necessarily as pushed in the algorithms as your white commentary channels. And then Jay Aubrey, or maybe his editor, I don't know how his videos are made, pulls up examples of women on YouTube who are like really successful, and every single one of them that I can see in the photo, except for Pokimane, who's Moroccan, is white. So in an attempt to refute Lilly's point about representation in media still being important and there's barriers that still need to be broken, you're actually inadvertently supporting her point by using all your examples looking white or looking close to white. And even though a lot of Lilly's talking points when it comes to feminism have been criticized, and I think rightfully so, about being this kind of colorblind feminism approach, I just think she likes to make herself palatable to a wider range of people. But like I said, I do think it is a fair criticism. To not have this image in your video that you're using as proof show that representation that you're trying to say exists is a misstep. It doesn't make your point look good. And it shows a blind spot that you have as a person. And then the next clip, I just don't even really have a good way to segue into, so let's just watch it.
Don't get me wrong, I love laughing at white people. I think my fellow whites deserve to be made fun of for the caucasity of naming their kid Paisley or Jackson with 2 X's. But if you're going to make jokes centered around someone's identity, just please make it funny. I'm of the belief that nothing is sacred and that everything should be left on the table when it comes to comedy, but if you're going to make a joke at the expense of someone's race, just be creative. Yeah, that's all you gotta do. Just be funny, please.
So Jay Aubrey is using a phrase, a talking point, I guess, I don't know, that's usually reserved for marginalized people who are speaking out against jokes that are being made about them. So it sounds like he thinks that white people can be marginalized in a video that came out in 2019. And again, I know this is before 2020, but still, like, how did no one say anything about this? How did millions of people watch this video so uncritically? And maybe there were people that were talking about this at the time, but they're getting drowned out by this popular opinion. And no matter which way you slice it, this take is a bad take. And I hope if you're on this channel, you understand why. And I don't have to explain the difference between like systematic racism and positions of power, things like that, and then just prejudice. It's like punching down versus punching up. There's a difference there. But bottom line, Lilly cannot be racist towards white people, period. Non-white people talking about and making jokes about their interactions with whiteness is not only okay, but it is necessary. So I'm gonna go on a little bit of a tangent here, but earlier in 2019 is when Captain Marvel came out. Now, rewind another year in 2018, and the reason why everyone was mad at Brie Larson at the beginning of 2019 is because at an award show, Brie Larson spoke about the need for representation in like the film critic space industry, whatever you want to call it. And then a certain cesspool here on the internet is never going to let her live it down. But here's what she actually said. I'm going to read it. Am I saying I hate white dudes? No, I'm not. I don't want to hear about what a white man has to say about Wrinkle in Time. I want to hear what a woman of color, a biracial woman has to say about the film. I want to hear what teenagers think about the film. If you make a movie that is a love letter to women of color, there is a chance that a woman of color does not have access to review and critique your film. And then she also made a call to publicists to look at who is and who is not getting invited to these press junkets, because Brie Larson is not talking about like Phil from Philadelphia in his basement making YouTube videos and whether or not he should be allowed to critique A Wrinkle in Time. That's not what she's talking about. She's talking about this institution of film critique that has a long storied history. But they just stopped listening after she said something about white men. They didn't hear about what she was actually saying. And this is a movie that they probably never even saw. Would have never been interested in the first place. Would never have talked about in the first place. What she's saying basically is that representation in TV and movies is important, but then so is the representation of the people who are critiquing that representation in the first place. When Moon Knight, the Marvel show on Disney Plus, came out, I wanted to watch a review from someone who had DID to see what they thought about how it was portrayed in the show. And so I went to YouTube and I looked up, did some keywords, and I ended up finding a small channel that was talking about it, and it was really good, and I really appreciated being able to see that perspective. But was anyone on the press tour for Moon Knight? Did they have DID? Was anyone in those like publications? Like, was there any representation there in the coverage? No. Again, you find that YouTube is more successful at breaking those barriers, even though, again, like I said, this was a small channel. It's not like they're getting pushed in the algorithm, but it's still out there. It's still there for me to search for, which is at least something. Whereas in Hollywood, in the media that's about Hollywood, do they even think about that stuff? And then, so review bombing, back to 2019, when Captain Marvel comes out, review bombing is used to silence voices that offend this reactionary type. So because Brie Larson was starring in a Marvel movie, which already after Black Panther, like people, the white bro, like Marvel comic guys who are racist but don't want to admit that they are, and sexist and all that, they're getting increasingly agitated with Marvel. And so after Brie Larson says that and then her movie is coming out, they need to make their feelings known about the movie. And also, it just provided, like, the go-to joke for them to be like, oh, well, she doesn't actually care what I think about her movie, or whatever. They're rabid, they're completely devoid of coherency. Lilly's show, factually, was review bombed, and this was not talked about at the time. And it happened in a very similar... It was review bombed. It was. If you know what review bombing is, and you go look at her reviews, it's review bombed. And I think it's extremely disingenuous for this group of reasonable commentary channels that I'm going to be talking about today, that I love, by the way. This is all just about reflection. For them to not, like, reflect on that, and instead, they're just giving power to bigoted people by reading the review bombs out in a video.
A complete show on bashing white people. Oh wow, how original. So much fun at every white person's expense, but it's okay, right? Disgusting. She's weak and does not have an original funny joke to save her life. She
is the joke. I'm sorry, but this is just not funny. It's painful to watch. The applause sign really gets the work out on this show. I guess this show is not made for me. I wish them good luck, but if this is woke comedy, then I'm out. This show is downright appalling in its unfunniness, production, and entertainment value. It was actually hard to watch. However, it was so bad that it's comical to see. In a world full of terrible talk show hosts, we found one even worse. Alan Cassidy.
So through that tangent, I just wanted to illustrate the increase in right-wing reactionary creators gaining more and more influence, like after the Trump era, and then especially after 2020, they've been extremely emboldened. Now you have the Andrew Tate stuff coming up. Like, it's been gaining momentum for years. And if you've been online for as long as I have, and you were a gamer girl like me back in the day, then you already knew this was coming with Gamergate 10 freaking years ago. These types of videos is one of the ways that you can fall into the alt-right pipeline. Alt-righty people use pop culture They appeal to a viewer's core identity and their emotions about that, and then they frame themselves as the good guys having to fight this crusade against the bad guys that are attacking that identity that's so sacred to them. And then through that, once they're in, then they're inundated with homophobic, sexist, racist, etc., transphobic, especially now, language, where it's becoming normalized to them slowly over time. Then they might even find more fringe creators that are bolstering these opinions and then pushing them further and further down to eventually you're watching Newsmax or Alex Jones or whatever. Nick Fuentes. The dog whistles in a video about Brie Larson could have ranged from, you know, a charisma on command video where they're talking about how uncharismatic Brie Larson is and like inventing all this shit in their heads about how she doesn't get along with her co-stars and all that stuff. But a lot of people were like, oh, I'm not sexist, I'm just analyzing her body language or whatever. To like more outright, like, the people that are just blatant about their sexism, because those people do exist, and then there's a whole range in between that they're like, because I'm not this guy all the way over here, I'm not really sexist, you know? It's not like I'm telling you to go die, like this guy over here. So they can use that to kind of shield themselves. Kind of an example of that is Ethan Klein realizing that he had become a part of this alt-right pipeline without even realizing it. And when he realized that, he realized he had to be more open about his politics and kind of distance himself from that. Because his goal with his anti-SJW content, at least what he says, is that he was focusing on like these extreme examples, just like he now reacts to like extreme Trump heads and stuff like that. So in his opinion, that's the same thing. In my opinion, it's not. I thought a lot of anti-SJW content at the time was, again, this dog whistly stuff that eventually Ethan Klein realized that his content was, and then made strides to change that. So you can become, basically what I'm trying to say is you can become a part of the problem without realizing it. I think PewDiePie, like the same thing with that. And that's how I feel about a lot of the commentaries surrounding Lilly's show, honestly. I don't think a lot of people knew that they were playing into these dog whistles because they might have even been ignorant to the fact that was happening, or because they see that as like, who even cares what that demographic has to say, that they're not even really focusing on it, so they don't realize that they're making similar points and kind of providing a bridge to this community. And they have blind spots, and that's another central theme of this video and why I'm making it in the first place, is for us to all think about the blind spots that we have and how that affects the way that we comment on things. And we all have blind spots. You probably learned very recently in the last few years what the G slur is. In America, we don't really have an awareness about Romani people. I think the only thing I can remember from my time in school, and I had a decent education, but I think the only thing I can remember is that I knew that they were also victims of the Holocaust, but I don't even think I really knew what their culture was all about or anything in particular. I think I just saw the name in a list of groups that were affected by the Holocaust. So in America, it's like not really at the forefront of our minds, but once you learn about that, you're like, oh, okay, so change language, whatever. I think the same thing for the Israel-Palestine conflict. A lot of people just became like not aware of that in this last fall, even though it's been happening for a very, very long time. Just because it's a blind spot, though, doesn't mean that's not causing harm. If you forget to check your blind spot and you change lanes and you hit somebody, you're going to be at fault for that accident. But I bet in the future, you'll check them more. So learning from mistakes. When I watch this Jay Aubrey video, I see a lot of those right-wing reactionary dog whistles. Here's another one. It's giving anti-affirmative action, like Bush era talking points, in my opinion.
God. So I think most respectable people can agree that representation in the workplace is a positive thing. You want a diverse group of employees for obvious reasons, but you also shouldn't downplay the importance of, credentials, the thing that actually makes you certified for a job. I don't know if this was just a failed attempt at a joke or if she actually did this, but hiring someone solely on the basis of their skin tone and not their qualifications is a little, what's the word? It's right on the tip of my tongue.
So I think we can all agree that diversity is super cool. That's my Jay Aubrey impression. I don't know if it's good. I'm not really good at impressions, but oh my god, it's like my grandma wrote this script. Are you kidding me? What in the Fox News hell is happening? And why did nobody say anything in 2019? This is crazy to me. Maybe you're somebody who doesn't get why what he said is so bad. And so I am going to take the time to explain it a little bit more. The idea that anyone is hired on the sole basis of diversity is ridiculous. Asking companies to examine their hiring processes and you know, who they're hiring from what demographics and stuff like that to ensure equal opportunities is not racist. This is like anti-racism 101. Like, I learned this in high school, but I also forgot it's 2019, and a lot of people, you know, they didn't learn about this stuff until 2020, so give them a break or whatever. I don't know. And I don't mean to be so cheeky. I know that people do learn at different times, and, you know, me being in an allyship position when it comes to racism because I am racially white, I kind of have to try to give people a little bit more grace than people who are actually affected by racism, which is why, you know, I don't need to be leading the charge of hatred. So I try to be like, hey, just so you know, this is kind of racist. Maybe you'll listen to me when I tell you. Anyway, it is factual. Sure, we know this from people's anecdotal experiences, but they're things that have actually happened to people. So, like, we have the data to support that people with names that don't look white, even if, like, you're a white Latina and your last name just happens to be a Latin last name, your resume might also get skipped in the pile. And that's just looking at the names. They don't even know what you look like yet. Like, this stuff does happen. Non-white people experience racism in the workforce. Period. End of story. Obviously, we live in a racist society. What do you think? Not all racism is like shouting racial slurs at people, but I think like that's what people think of when I think of racism. It's like systematic. These things are deep, and some of the stuff isn't even your fault. And so you don't have to feel so attacked when somebody tries to call you out for it, because, you know, society is the way that it is. And what's great though is that we have the ability to grow from that. So by seeking diversity in the workplace, you're leveling the playing field. Here's this example that I heard in high school that helped me understand it. And so maybe it'll help you as well. Or maybe you can use this analogy if you have to deal with people like this in your real life. Basically, if you have like a few students trying to shoot a crumbled piece of paper into a trash can at the top of the classroom, obviously the kids, they're going to have different skill levels, but their position in the classroom is also going to have an effect on their ability to make it into the trash can. So let's say you have somebody who's like on the basketball team, like they're really good at aiming, but you put them in the back of the classroom, maybe their view is even obstructed a little bit, so they can't really see the trash can, and then they don't make it. That's not indicative of their talent, really. It's just of the position that they were in. On the other side of things, you also, if someone's right at the front, like right next to the trash can, and let's say like they're not good at aiming at all, like they hate gym class, me, but they're able to make it into the trash can because they're so close. It's like how are you not going to, you know? That is also not indicative of their talent level. So then when you bring everyone to the same position to try and make it into the trash can, you're leveling the playing field, and then that's when you get to see people's talents more. But the person who made it just because they were close, maybe now they can't make it at all, and they see that as a slight. They see that as discrimination, even though it's not taking away something from them. It's leveling the playing field and making things fair. So again, literally racism 101. It's so baffling to me that I have to explain this, especially to people who consider themselves to be reasonably progressive. But in America, like, the bar is actually in hell when it comes to being able to label yourself as progressive. I feel like people think that just because they think you should be able to get an abortion if you want to means that they're such a cool person.
She's acting like there's no diversity in the media today whatsoever. Like we're back in the early 2000s or some shit. It's honestly insulting how she acts as if she's the one paving the way for all this representation. You know, the representation that we already kinda have.
This is one of the most frustrating things when it comes to talking to cis white men, and unfortunately having a marginalized sexuality does not stop cis white gays from being sexist as well. But I hate when people who don't really need to be represented tell people how to feel about their own representation. So like I said before, I am racially white, but I'm also Native. I have this cultural experience. It really defines who I am. It's a huge part of me. It's difficult because a lot of people don't understand, because nativeness isn't just race, it's also ethnicity and nationality, and it's a different type of thing. But anyway, so while I can't speak to like that racial representation, I can speak to like cultural representation, and I know that Native representation is shit. Growing up, Pocahontas was not my favorite Disney princess. That didn't even feel like representation to me. Because like, if you think about it, if you're white, maybe you have like English ancestry and they came on the Mayflower or something. I don't know. If you watch a movie about the Pilgrims, are you gonna feel represented by the people in the movie? Probably not, you know? So that really was never, I didn't hate Pocahontas, I liked it, but I just wasn't like obsessed with it. Like maybe I would have been if Echo existed at the time. And Echo, I can't wait until the show comes out. It's literally coming out in a couple of days. And she is a native, like anti-hero villain-ish. She changes here and there in the comics from Marvel, and she was in the Hawkeye show, and I really loved that show, and I loved her, and I'm really excited for the show. And even though Reservation Dogs got a lot of valid criticism about like perpetuating anti-blackness in the Native community and just some other stuff like that, so it wasn't perfect representation by any means, but that also was just such an important show to be out there. And then also like Killers of Flower Moon coming out and Lily Gladstone going on press tours and talking about gender and colonization in a way that made me feel so seen, that I never thought I would see somebody talk about something that I feel so deeply and that summarizes how I feel about things in such a public way that it almost validates it in a sense. I remember in middle school when I told the girls at my art table, I was like, Peter Pan's kind of racist. And then they tried to argue with me. I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, Sarah, that I think what makes the red man red is racist. Sorry. I guess I don't know what I'm talking about. Like, I have this vivid memory. But when you made this video, dude, J. Aubrey, none of that representation that I just mentioned even existed. Smoke signals was like what we had. Or also like these ancient, like a lot of Native representation in media shows this, it's always in the past a lot of the time, so it makes it feel like this distant memory, which is a part of continuing genocide, and I could go on a whole tangent about that, but yeah. So for J. Aubrey to get on his channel and say, we actually have a lot of representation in media, bro, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. I'm so sorry, you don't know what you're talking about, and that's okay. It's okay to have blind spots, but you don't need to like, this is not a point that you are qualified to make or even needed to make in the first place. The examples given, again, just like the examples given for like YouTubers that are women that are powerful and that most of them are white, the examples that he gives for diversity media, Parks and Rec, my guy. I mean, it's not diverse, but that's when you pick, bro, Black Panther had come out by the time you made this video and you didn't use that, but he does put text on the screen that says, oh, we're nowhere near there. But then you're just like, why are you making this point then? Because Lily's point is that representation is important and you're calling her annoying for that because it already exists, but then you're saying that it's not perfect yet. And Lilly is factually like the first South Asian woman, bisexual woman of color, on a late night show that didn't exist before. So like, your points don't make any sense. When you actually break them down logically, you're not just going off of the emotion and wanting to turn Lily into a punching bag, like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, do you even know what the writers look like on the shows that you use as examples? Because that's what we're talking about. That's what Lily was talking about in the section that you used to critique her. Part of the skit was about her writer's room, and you really had a problem with this part. But yeah, in your examples, like, do you know what the writers look like in those shows that you use as an example? Lily has been criticized for not mentioning Wanda Sykes, and I think Monique. There was two women, I can't remember both, but there have been women of color who have done stuff like this in the past, and Lily was not mentioning them, and she did receive criticism for that. But again, that's not what J. Aubrey is talking about. That is a valid piece of criticism that none of these commentary channels even put in their video. So you're arguing that she's not paving the way for anybody when that's factually incorrect. I mean, you can just say that you think that she's just shoving her identity down your throat like a typical Fox News ass human being.
It's not necessarily the fact that she's a liberal or a feminist that pisses a lot of people off. It's the way she shoves her identity down her audience's throat, which is annoying no matter what you believe politically.
Is this not the most Sunny V2 ass shit that you've ever seen? From somebody that you wouldn't have expected it from? I wouldn't have expected it from them. And again, like, this is 2019. I don't want to say that this is who J. Aubrey is as a person because, like I said, I've watched videos since then. It's possible that he's grown in this time, but we have to laugh at the past. We have to laugh. I was screaming watching this a few months back, which is when I tweeted about it, screaming. I had to pause the clips over and over again. I'm like, oh my God. And then when I went to pull clips for this video for me to react to, it happened all over again, even though it was a couple months later. Oh my God. This is so cringe. This is so cringe. Even for 2019, it's so cringe. How did we not see this at the time? How?
She's doing so in the most antagonistic way imaginable, alienating the very branch of her audience that she's trying to educate, which would be fine, I guess, if it weren't for the fact that ignorant people aren't going to be swayed to your side through hostility. If anything, that'll just push them further into bigotry and prejudice. Lilly is only granting more ammunition to her critics by being as smug and unlikable as possible. Her jokes only do so much as to turn potential viewers away, and I only hope that she's able to realize and correct this issue before it becomes too late, because not everyone is lucky enough to inherit such a massive platform. It's only within reason to ask that you use it wisely.
If we want to talk about moral fucking grandstanding, let's talk about your tone policing, dude. Like I said before, making fun of whiteness, and that's what it is. It's whiteness that's being made fun of. Not all people are consumed with whiteness. Not all people are like, you know, white supremacy, like active white supremacists, stuff like that. And whiteness also is something that white people literally invented themselves. Making fun of it is necessary. Like, do you want me to tone police you on you making a commentary video about your middle school bully? Like, yeah, maybe if you're all, like, if I'm also a middle school bully, I'm gonna be offended by that content. But, like, the content's not made for me. Does that mean that it shouldn't exist? I will say one of the major problems with Lilly's show is that it's really unclear who the target audience is supposed to be. Is it to bring in a new audience, her audience from YouTube, to this traditional form of media in late night? Because that's what it seemed like the intention was. So then, yeah, the jokes about the boomer crowd are a little bit much because it's like those aren't the people that are watching your show. But some of the examples that Aubrey was using were jokes about the all-white writers' room, like I mentioned earlier, and other things talking about the industry itself. An industry that you don't really know anything about because you haven't been in any traditional media. So again, it's a blind spot that you have, which is fine. And I'm not saying, like, if you don't know everything, you can't make a commentary video, but then you're open to critique as well. And we're going to get into all the institutional barriers that were put into place for this show that we've only discovered in the last couple of years as Lilly's opened up about it. But something that none of these commenters ever took the time to think about or to give a second thought about was how much actual control Lilly had over the show. Which, again, I was right there with you all at the time. It's like, why doesn't she just make it better? But, like, why were we so naive to think that that was it, that was the solution, to just do better? Like, it's kind of crazy if you think about it. And you can definitely say that her ego made it seem that way. She seemed like the super capable, like, I can do anything, like, I'm not gonna take any criticism. Like, that's the image that she was presenting, so it does make sense that people perceived her that way. But again, if you take a step back and you think about it, a lot of the things that we're gonna find out what happened while she was making the show, logically, like, that makes sense. And how did we miss it? And this is part of the issue that I had with Amanda from Swell Entertainment's video, watching it back. I've been subscribed to Amanda since the TanaCon video, but like before it blew up, it came on my recommended like early in its views. And then I think I subscribed right away and was watching her and when this video came out, it was in my subscription box and stuff like that. And at the time, I really enjoyed this video as well. And I think overall it is a good video. But some of that naivete that I was describing is definitely present here and maybe putting blame in some of the wrong place. And I wish she would have just like critiqued or tried to critique NBC as well. Because that's just a side of things that nobody really touched at all. And I think that's important. Like, why? That's something that we have to look into. But yeah, I have a heavy Amanda bias and like a low-key crush. But I do have to like mention just some of the things that I disagreed about with this video. But overall, like I said, it is a good video. And I think what made Amanda's video so special is that she was coming at it from, I've been to these types of shows before in the past. I'm going to actually go see Lilly's show so that I can comment from that perspective. And then she was able to say like what's normal and what's not normal with other late night shows, and then this one that she saw, or other shows in general. And Lilly's show, I think she could have gone more into that though, because she does compare, but her criticisms are more towards Lilly not making those changes instead of like, is NBC not giving you the resources, blah, 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 blah. which I think is interesting.
That entire selection was just planted. Do something spontaneous for your show. Do something that's not overproduced and scripted. Just do something more fun. But usually the point of audience plans is to spread them out so that they can get the applause going in different sections. It's like a ripple effect. Someone starts clapping and then everyone starts clapping, okay? That's part of the goal of having an audience plan. I don't know why you guys sit them all up front. Even for bullshitting your show, you are doing it wrong.
And again, it's an understandable blind spot to have because of how Lilly was coming across at the time. But I think it's interesting that we did not look further into this collectively. And then Lilly did start speaking up about it. She released her second book, which was inspired by the time that she had with the show and all of the things that she learned spiritually and all that.
You got given a late night show. You were the first woman of color to be led
In over 30 years, yep.
in over 30 years to be led into that boys club on a major network. When I said that, you said, I'm so sorry. Tell me why you said that.
Because I don't think the thing was good. And I'm not necessarily proud of it. You know, when I got the show, again, me being the disruptor, the whole first season, the advertising was, we're gonna break the mold. We're knocking down the doors of late night. We're gonna do things differently. And then I proceeded to do things pretty much exactly how they've always been done.
Why?
Because for the first time in my life, I was in a situation where I could not call the shots. I couldn't make the decisions. I didn't have the resources to do things differently. The system is not built to do... The issue is the system is not built to do things differently.
And I think there are still people from that reactionary space who would make videos and like, oh, she's coping, she's making excuses, she's blaming them. But I think the rest of us, those of us who are more reasonable, should hear her out. And so that I'm gonna play clips of her talking about that as well. And it also begs the question, what is the responsibility of commenters when it comes to new information coming and having to look at something in a new perspective? Like, would Jay Aubrey watch his Lilly Singh video and still agree with it? Would he have criticism for himself? Same thing with Amanda, same thing with anybody else who was making content at the time. That's just something that I'm curious about. So yeah, the lack of resources is something that's talked about a lot in these interviews. So let's just remove the fact that Lilly is the person that we're talking about. Put any other YouTuber in this situation. I think traditional media in general looks down on new media, even though they've had to adapt and they've had to work with it. I think they still have these biases about it. And so even if you're not a bisexual woman of color working with NBC, you're a white guy from YouTube, unless you're like a Mr. Beast type who has a lot of money and a lot of capital and stuff like that, probably are going to experience some of the similar things that Lilly experienced. Although white men in general are just more comfortable a lot of the time asking for additional resources, so even still, the outcome probably would have been different. But I think, yes, there definitely is a component, obviously, of Lilly being a woman of color, not straight, all that. But I think YouTubers in general, when working with traditional media, it's often not really that successful. And so I think there is a bit of traditional media not believing in the new stuff. So they drew Lilly in with the promise of breaking the mold, something that she's shown that she's been passionate about for her entire life, basically, and her career, of course. In the same interview, she talks about how it's basically her natural state of being.
And the common thread between everything, especially during this time period you're talking about, can be summarized in one word, and that is disruptor. I think my purpose is to disrupt. And I think I've done it continuously in my life, from being a tomboy as a kid to being outspoken in a room full of uncles to getting into the entertainment industry, not through an agent, not through moving to LA, but through YouTube, where there are no gatekeepers. I remember thinking and telling my therapist, I don't want to be the first. I don't want to be the first anymore. I hate being the first. I don't want the pressure of all this. I just want to do what I love doing. And my therapist joked and said, yeah, you need to pick a cause. You got a lot of things going. You have to pick an issue. But I have since embraced that.
Lilly's personality as a disruptor creates the perfect pathway to be a YouTuber. One thing that all of the commenters could agree on that I watched is that YouTube is a very egocentric medium. And it is. Like I said before, the tagline literally was broadcast yourself. There is an inherent belief that you need to have that your opinion, your art, whatever, is worth seeing and that people will care. Having an ego, though, is like human nature. I think, yeah, a lot of people fulfill that sense of self through performance and attention. But other people, they still do have ego drives. They just probably fulfill that in different ways. It's when you become consumed with stroking your ego that you can start to get some of those negative traits that we associate with ego-ness in general, like being self-centered and having an overly inflated sense of self and things like that. There is this weird phenomenon as well, where YouTubers as a community will be very critical of anything that someone from this platform tries to make outside of the platform. It's almost as if you have to go above and beyond in order to prove yourself in these ventures, because you're immediately going to get labeled as cringe or whatever. I'm sure a lot of the time, like, they are right. The Smosh movies, not amazing. Shane Dawson's movies are not amazing. But again, we're going back to our definitions on community. In the first definition, where you're simply grouped by one common characteristic, you're going to be ideologically opposed to a lot of the people in that grouping. However, because you're getting grouped together and it's not something that you're choosing, you might feel weirdly defensive and like you have to separate yourself from the people that you don't agree with within that same group. And that's where I think the commentary against cringy YouTubers and mainstream media, I think that's where that stems from. It stems from a sense kind of embarrassment and not wanting to be associated with that just because you share the same platform as somebody, I think. What do you think about that?
It just doesn't make sense. It seems like she set herself up to fail. Why did she think she could do this? Oh, I know why. It's because YouTubers think they can do anything. You're never as good as the overly positive comments will make you seem, and you're never as bad as the negative comments will make you seem, but it's important not to absorb that and let that influence how you feel about yourself. Even if it's good feedback, it's important not to take that on and just have an ego that goes through the roof, where at the height of their ego, they are at their worst while simultaneously feeling invincible. It's why Logan Paul, during the peak of his relevance, probably thought, I could never fuck up. And then he did fuck up and it came as a huge shock to him.
I've made a severe...
I think there was just no way that YouTube was going to prepare Lilly for the storm of hatred she's been receiving, and now she's in self-defense mode.
Sorry for how weirdly that was cut up. I tried finding the best way to summarize Drew Gooden's points without just playing the whole video, because the whole video is great, and all of the videos, as always, are linked below, so you can watch the whole thing. So overall, I really liked Drew Gooden's video as well. I think his might be the best of that time, and has the videos to back it up. Or the views. It has the views to back it up. And I think it does a better job of separating itself from kind of tying in those bigoted talking points. Unintentional or intentional talking points that are found in other commentary videos about it. But I think the question of why did she think she could do this is something we've all thought during this whole Lilly Singh late night saga. And yeah, the YouTuber ego is definitely a big part of it, but I don't think YouTubers necessarily are more egotistical than other famous people, for example, or even just like your average Joe on the street. There are a lot of attention whores that are normal everyday people that I see out in public. You don't have to have social media or be on TV and be famous in order to have that come out. Like, what makes Donald Trump thinks he can run for president? What makes you comment on a video or on a recipe or whatever? There's like, we all kind of have that need to share our thoughts, or we have this belief in ourselves to do something, like with Donald Trump being president and stuff like that. When we look into Lilly and her background more, things start to become more clear. That why starts to become more clear.
You see, because my mom had been told that if she gave birth to a daughter, it wasn't worth phoning home about. After all, she'd already given birth to my older sister, and this time everyone had high hopes that she would do right and have a son. But she didn't. She had me. From the moment I came into this world, I was already a disappointment to so many people.
So from her literal first breath on Earth, Lilly has something to prove. And this has influenced the entirety of her life and the decisions that she makes, how she carries herself, everything.
In my adult life, I have become very self-aware with the fact that I have a chip on my shoulder. Like, I have a major grudge, and I'm not resistant to it. I fully embrace it. And that grudge is gender equality. And the reason is because, you know, in Indian culture, this is not exclusive to Indian culture, there's many cultures where this is the case, women and girls are not valued as much as men.
And this is a factual statement, it's subjective truth. But by the way that people react to Lilly, you would think she's harping on something that is completely imaginary or something that's just like a distant memory that's like romanticized, but neither are the case. And I don't have clips from them, but I also did watch 16 Leo's videos about this, and I remember him saying something that essentially boiled down to, why are you doing a woman empowerment thing in the middle of a pandemic, which I thought was laughably insane. Also, yeah, probably a joke, but still, oh my god. This was in response to the bad gal controversy, which we are going to get into. Trust me, we will be getting into that. I know this video is long, but that is coming. And so again, it's like valid criticisms being mixed in with these weird jokes and like points that kind of refute what they're saying in these videos. Anyway, I find those who are in positions of privilege experience this fatigue when marginalized people are kind of talking about the things that they go through in their own experiences. Even if they come across as a super progressive person, you see it all over these commentary videos about Lilly's show. Society turns people who are marginalized into these advocates in the public eye. We overly rely on them to make statements, to educate people, to be an example. But then they also receive backlash when society thinks that they're talking about these things too much.
Something so new about yourself and starting the late night show at the same time was a little rough, because then every interview would ask me about this. And I was like, I don't know yet. This still hurts me. You asked me this question, it hurts hurting me, because I'm still so new. It was tough.
I imagine it's a very strange thing, because when you're a public figure, it becomes part of your brand.
Yes.
But you're discovering it at the same time.
At the same time, what a lot of people don't realize is that I didn't choose it to make it part of my brand.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't write the headlines, the repetitive headlines. First bisexual woman of color, get it. The number one thing people say if they want to hate on me is, we get it, you're a bisexual woman of color. I didn't write those headlines, right? And another thing I challenge people to, and this is the hardest part about being a minority, is when people use your identity against you. It's hard for us to accept. It's hard for me to accept. So, when I talk about my sexuality in a monologue, I'm trying to be myself, and people catch on to that. You're talking about being bisexual again, we get it. Jimmy or Seth talks about their wife. No one's catching on to that, being like, are you talking about being straight again? Like, we get it, you're straight. And so there's a different standard that is set for any minority group, which makes things really, really challenging. We get it, you're brown. Oh, I'm just talking about my parents, just like everybody else will make jokes about their parents, but you're just flagging it because I'm different.
And if you've ever found yourself thinking that about someone, it's really important to examine why that is, because it's probably the unconscious bias coming out. Going back to Drew's video, we heard him talk more about YouTuber ego, but I wanted to point out, I wanted to just throw this out there. I don't know if we can, as racially white people, I don't know if we can evaluate someone who is marginalized and their ego on the same level as we would evaluate people who are also white. I don't think that is fair for a white person to do to somebody who's not white, if that makes sense. Because who am I as a white person to determine whether or not a person of color is acting like an egomaniac? And that's not to say that I can't criticize or comment on Kanye West, for example. It's important to understand how to approach criticism so that you're not contributing to unconscious biases. And this is the most important lesson that I've had to learn in the last few years. This is a very personal lesson to me that I've had to learn. And I think it's really important to think about. And marginalized people are not allowed to be confident in the same way that white people are allowed to be, or cis people, able-bodied, whatever. Like when you have like these marginalized identities compared to the people around you, the expectations are just different. For example, a Black woman standing up for herself in a lot of spaces is going to be seen as a stereotype instead of her just standing her ground and being assertive. Some people in their mind, they're going to twist that into thinking that she's aggressive. And a lot of people aren't even realizing that that's what they're doing sometimes. Other people, they definitely know what they're doing, but that's why it's like unconscious biases, and you have to be aware of those things. So a lot of these commentary videos focus on Lilly's confidence that they feel is unearned more than they focus on this network, this corporation that is not supporting her and setting her up for failure, honestly. Which again, these observations at the time are fair to an extent because of everything that all the information that we were given at the time. But a lot of the commentary, even from reasonable creators, especially when you put it all together and how it was all coming at once, it feels Like, it was not just about constructive criticism, even though that's what they want to say. It was about knocking her down a peg, especially when she wasn't just rolling over and accepting all of the abuse that she was receiving. And I'm not talking about the reasonable criticisms. She was experiencing a lot of abuse, review bombing, these ridiculous, again, incoherent, unintelligent ass channels and people on Twitter and all that. They were like, that was all coming her way too. And that is not something that these people talked about either.
Lilly's response may have been one that was rooted in frustration at public response to her content. She clearly didn't feel it was representative of the show as a whole. And she probably had a point. But rather than just suggesting that people watch more of the show, it was almost a tit for tat. She had to cherry pick responses and strawman perspectives to get even with her haters.
And I also don't know if cherry picking responses is a fair assessment. Just like through all of the research that I did for this video, that's the conclusion that I came to, because like I talked about in my last video, I do understand though where that assessment comes from. I have always followed YouTube drama stuff. I've always been like, and I mentioned this in the last video, I've always been like, why don't they just respond to like the valid criticisms that people have and just ignore all the noise, as if it's that easy. And in the example in my last video I gave of the Lindsay Ellis situation, I think that's just like a really good representation of what the person is experiencing on their end, where it's like very difficult for them to see that constructive criticism. And yes, there are a lot of people that use that as a shield and they only focus on the negative. It's kind of like when someone in their apology video talks about their family receiving death threats, which is a bad thing, but some people use it in a way to deflect from the criticism, to turn themselves into the victim. That does happen. But I think also people assume that is where someone is coming from, even if the situation is a little bit more nuanced than that. And I think any of us in that situation would find it hard to parse through real criticism and all the ridiculous nonsense that people are doing. And again, like I said in my last video, that's not even tone policing people who are actually offended by stuff. It's more just like people who are kind of jumping on the hate bandwagon that ruins it for everybody else. Because now Lily's gonna lump everyone together because that's just what emotions do to you. And upon reflection, she's able to pull it apart, but at the time, that's how it feels.
For me, I get very uncomfortable when we talk about people critiquing things I worked very hard on, because those are my babies. My projects are my babies. And to be just really blunt, it hurts my feelings. And I think I thought for a long time I had to put on a facade that it doesn't hurt my feelings, but it does. I think I am a sensitive artist in a lot of ways.
Specifically the community, which is the YouTube community you'd come from. People made very hurtful, very shallow criticisms, sometimes your personal criticisms about you in the show.
I had to learn not, and I mean this with love, but I mean this very bluntly, not to take advice from people giving it from inside their comfort zone. The amount of people, especially on YouTube, that would criticize the jokes on my show, the delivery on my show, the sound quality of my show without never having stepped foot into a late night studio. As a logical person, I have to shut that down.
And that does sound harsh. It did make me cringe the first time that I watched it, because there is this negative image that's presented when you say that you're only going to accept criticism from people that you respect. But I don't think that's exactly what she was saying. As we're learning, and I'm going to play some more clips, we're going to continue to learn all of the obstacles that she faced with NBC. And I think her point is that the network failed her in so many ways that people didn't even fathom at the time that they were making these videos about her, because they were never in her position to have those experiences. They'd never been the face of a late night thing. And that doesn't mean that their criticism isn't valid and that they're not worthy of her hearing them out or whatever. It's just that they are not going to be able to speak to those specific things. You could also say she wasn't really sharing those things at the time, but was she in a position to? Like, again, it makes sense, but I think looking back at it now a couple years later upon reflection, these are the things that we can think about. If you have an experience trying to break a mold, you just don't have the perspective of the reality of that situation. You just kind of have this romanticized idea that we have of representation in our minds, that all it takes is the casting, and then that is the representation, not, you know, all the things, the realities of what their experience is in that role or whatever. It's like this facade of representation that's getting the brownie points instead of actual representation.
People will want you because of all the boxes you check. But then once you're there, it's those same things that they try to limit. It's not enough to say we're inclusive or we're diverse, because the system is not set up for that late night host. Right. You know what I mean? If you're bringing me to the table to start this new show and saying it's a historic show and you're advertising as a first in history and all this stuff, I'm gonna need the resources to make it something worthy of that title. Another small thing of like, I once on my late night show said, I don't think I've ever said this right. Once at a late night show said, my favorite actress is Madhuri Dixit. That was the sentence. And I get an email, can you translate this line for us? I'm like,
that's a person's name.
Translate this line. Like, it's so hard to do a good job when you're dealing with things like that. And so I keep saying like, I'm so proud of the movements being made, but the system needs to be reworked.
How many of the people criticizing Lilly, in the ways that we've seen so far, have experienced something that seems so small, but says so much about the system itself? Like, just asking somebody to translate someone's name is so crazy to me. And again, it seems small if you have never had to deal with something like that, but someone's name is so important. And yeah, anyway, that kind of blew my mind. But we do have more examples that are a little bit less subtle than that.
Okay, so the episode has to be exactly 22 minutes and 23 seconds. It has to be. That amount of time. It cannot be a second over. It cannot be under. The acts have to be broken down like this because our commercials have to go in these time things. So you had a joke that went there, it can't go there anymore. You have to do it like this. Oh, you're following Jimmy and Seth, and the audience is kind of used to their format. So you can do things differently, but it has to start with a monologue. So you're gonna have to come out, you're gonna have to hit the mark, you have to do the monologue. So many times when I did that monologue, which was the worst part of the show, it was like a 10-minute monologue of mediocre jokes because I had a tiny writer's room and very few resources. This is to no discredit to the writers. I just had such few writers that were too overworked. There were episodes where I would miss the mark and I would mess up and it was the best part of the show and I would have to do it again to get it right. And I would always think, why can't we just put the mess up on air? The best part of the show, even beyond that, was before we were even rolling, I would go out and I would warm up the audience and I would just riff with them and talk some jokes, and it would be so just natural and funny, and you would never see that in the show. Why? We didn't have enough cameras to shoot the audience, so we couldn't put it in the show. So the system was not built for breaking the mold.
So the network that wants Lilly for what she represents, and also for her built-in audience, what did they bring to the table? The platform, I guess. And this analogy of having a seat at the table is the focus of Lilly's TED Talk. And through it, you can see how much this taught her about the realities of representation. Representation is a commodity to these corporations. And because the goal is selling something over having a genuine interest in leveling the playing field, they're going to continue to exploit the marginalized people that they use for their ratings, to sell, whatever. Again, corporations, capitalists, not friends.
And I remember thinking, now, I've been invited to the big table. Now, unfortunately, the budget wasn't based on the importance or significance or historic nature of the show. It was based on the 1:30 a.m. time slot that we had. So, to say the budget was small, the writing staff even smaller, and to do the first season, I had to shoot 96 episodes of late night television in 3 months. Who was right? To put that into perspective, that is shooting 2 to 3 episodes a day versus the network standard of 1 a day, maybe 2 on Thursday. And I start to feel like, I think this chair is a little wobbly. I would receive notes like, don't be so loud, don't be so big, don't be so angry, smile more. And my all-time favorite, don't over-index on the South Asian stuff. I kept trying to pull up my seat. I kept trying to join the dinner conversation. I kept trying to ask for a more supportive seat. But every time I would be told that I should be grateful to have a seat in the first place. After all, everyone else that looks like me is still waiting outside the restaurant in the cold. And the strange thing about having a wobbly seat is that you spend so much time trying to keep it upright that you can never bring your full self to the table.
And you'll notice that I'm playing like clips from her on multiple different platforms talking about this stuff. But her story is consistent through all of these different platforms. She basically says some of the same things. So I wanted to show also the consistency in how she's talking about her experiences, to just kind of show that like she's not just making it up, she's not just coping, she's not just coming up with excuses. Like, these are her genuine experiences. I know that reasonable creators don't believe that either, but I just kind of wanted to kind of add that as well. So where has all of the reflection been about this time period? I feel like people don't really talk about this. Before the Anthony Padilla video, which was the one that inspired this video, apparently The Right Opinion uploaded a video about Lilly Singh and a reflection on this time period as well, which I don't know how I missed because I am subscribed to The Right Opinion. Yeah, I didn't know that this existed until I started doing my research after I decided I wanted to make this video. But he brings up a really good point that I didn't even think of and that nobody else has brought up yet so far, is the time slot that they gave Lilly was already failing. And this was like their last ditch effort to make that work. But then they didn't try anything new. So
if one thing was clear, it was that NBC quite liked Lilly Singh. And although they weren't willing to continue the talk show, they wanted to retain her abilities for future content. And both parties seemed happy with that outcome. It's not hard to see why many thought a late night show catered towards a more millennial audience should have legs. Unfortunately, it just didn't. And although there'll always be a recurring audience, the numbers have been dwindling for the past few years, and Lilly's slot was already not considered prime time. Since Lilly's departure, other hosts who had broadcast at similar time slots had also left their programs, including Trevor Noah and James Corden. NBC themselves had stated they would not be replenishing the time slot and subsequently handed it back to affiliates in the following month, making Lilly the last host of a talk show in that time slot held since 1988. And Lilly Singh's show was much more a Hail Mary to save a struggling medium, which less and less people were tuning into, rather than the destroyer of NBC bank balances.
So it's just a typical situation of a network trying to do something new, but then doing all of the same old stuff, which is inevitably going to fail because it has already. And then that kind of reinforces in the corporation's mind that, oh, representation isn't actually that important. It doesn't sell like it's supposed to. And then that can unfortunately probably lead to less diversity in the future because that's just how these places operate. But also, like, what do we mean when we say that something was a failure? In this case, is it because it wasn't renewed for a third season? Is it because of the like Rotten Tomatoes audience score? Is it because of the backlash? Like, probably all of those. If you ask somebody why they think her show failed, they probably would start listing a lot of those things. But what, if anything, did the show succeed at? Because the climb is a lot steeper and more treacherous for marginalized voices. Success is just going to look different, especially when you're one of the first people to do something.
So the guests that were on my show were people that could not get on any other late night show because people would not book them. I'm talking BIPOC people, queer people, diverse people. When there was a farmers' protest in India, people that would talk about that were talking about things that were not being talked about on our late night shows. My staff, incredibly diverse, even still a win. That is a win. So again, we go back to there's different ways to view success.
When you're the first to do something, or you're the first person that looks like you to do something, it's just so hard to say that it will be a success. All you can do is try, and failure is a part of any process.
The way I see it is, if years from now there is a late night host or anyone even close to that role that does look like me, I would like to hope that because of their existence, that means my show was a success. You failed and taught an industry something and paved a small inch of a path that someone else walked. Like, I really will die on that hill. I have that belief. That's what representation's about.
Representation is also now kind of a nebulous word, just like community. It's heavily romanticized. Sometimes even people within marginalized groups will look down on their peers for not succeeding like them. I have a friend whose dad, it took him a while to get citizenship, in the whole legal process and everything. It cost so much money, took multiple attempts because it's difficult to do. And instead of having empathy and maybe helping out people like him later, instead he takes on kind of that unfortunate conservative route that some immigrant parents do, where it's like, okay, well, I did this, now everybody should. Why would anybody not do it the legal way? Because I was able to do it. Then you'll also have white people cling on to those model minorities and then also place these expectations onto marginalized people and like, oh, why can't you be like my friend over here that was able to do it? So I think the idea of representation is something that a lot of people, a lot of normies, a lot of everyday media consumers are really into, being able to see themselves more in media, getting to see these diverse stories. Everything Everywhere All at Once I watched it late, but I finally watched it recently, I think in the last 6 months, and it is amazing. And like, would that movie have been able to been made 10 years ago and be as much of a success? Like, there is progress that's being made, and representation has been making a lot of strides. But I think if we're not in the industry, we don't see how, like, the realities of that situation. Like I said, we don't know the types of barriers that are being put in place. We just know that we like the thing and we're like, why is there not more of this thing? And maybe even sometimes we're propping up these success stories of representation and thinking, well, why can't other people be like this? Why can't we replicate this? And the ones creating the media are not the only problem. Brie Larson, like I mentioned before, was talking about the media about, you know, Hollywood and the representation there. You need to have diverse perspectives to properly analyze a diverse media landscape. Those same publications that would make articles celebrating Lilly being the first bisexual woman of color on late night would not include her perspective with Conan and Kimmel and Seth Meyers and all those people when it would come to, like, you know, a roundup of what are the late night opinions of Kamala Harris being vice president or whatever else it would happen to be. She wasn't included in those. So now these media outlets that celebrated her for being different are not continuing to celebrate those differences.
How do critics of traditional media differ from YouTube comments?
YouTube commenters, whether they like you or not, they're going to equally come at you. What really I found with traditional critiquers is that sometimes the harshest critique they gave me was just to ignore my existence. We had, for the first time in history, female vice president of the United States. When I got my second season of my late night show, I was like, there is a late night host that can talk about this perspective. Some of the biggest topics at the time were abortion, female bodies. I was like, yes. A lot of big outlets never even covered my take on it. It was every of the male hosts, their take on it. And for me, that was a harder pill to swallow than a hate comment. I was like, oh, you don't even want to acknowledge that a different perspective exists, even though it's been so hard to get to this position to be able to share that perspective.
And then the other side of representation is the fact that you're never going to be able to represent every single person that is a part of the same group. Because again, that first definition of community is extremely broad. And we're all unique humans. We do share a lot of commonality, but we also have all of our unique experiences. And those different combinations make us into our unique human beings that we are.
It's like the holy trinity of a bad place to be, right?
100%. Even you saying this has given me a fourth pimple on my cheek. And I'm sweating because it does evoke an emotional response out of me. And it's not just the YouTube community. It was the South Asian community that I got critics from. It was a queer community that criticized. In every community, there was people, not all, but there were some people that were criticizing me. And that's a really hard pill to swallow. When I just finished telling you that part of the reason I said yes to this show was to help pave a path. I felt a responsibility to communities. The tough part about being a minority anything is that so many people are counting on you to reflect their experience. The best you can do is reflect your own. The best I could have ever done is talk about my experience and my lived circumstances. That's never gonna satisfy over 1 billion South Asian people, queer people, women, that's half of the population right there. There's no way. And that's such a hard pill to swallow, to know that you can go out there, try your best, and still, because you're the only one, people are gonna criticize you.
Here's the thing, Lilly was not getting critiqued by these communities for not representing all of them well enough. She was critiqued for her blind spots. There were several voices, actually, that we have not heard from yet in this video, and that were completely shut out of all of the discourse that was happening at the time. And this video is almost finished, and we're just now getting to this section. And that is illustrative of what it was like at the time as well. So Lilly has been critiqued throughout her career for appropriating Black culture through hairstyles and manners of speech and things like that. And in an article for Teen Vogue, Tayo Barrow is discussing her past and how this is being presented, Lilly having a late night show is being presented as a win for women of color, but how Lilly herself has not always been there for women of color, how she's been actively contributing to things that harm them. And then in an article by Anushka Pinto, Lilly's explanation for her appropriation is dissected. Lilly grew up in an ethnically diverse area of Toronto, and she was in some proximity to Black culture growing up, but this is often used as an excuse for non-Black people to freely use AAVE or other things that are associated with Black culture. Whereas you don't see Black people from cities where this cultural exchange is happening and appropriating, you know, other cultures that are around them. You only see it towards Black culture, really. So is it cultural osmosis, or is it being a culture vulture? Maybe not intentionally because they're growing up in it, but I live in Milwaukee, so this is something that is really at the forefront of my mind. Milwaukee has a history of being extremely segregated, but there definitely is like a lot of cultural osmosis, I guess you could say. And a lot of the things that people would consider Milwaukee quirks, like slang and things like that, are actually stemming from Black culture. For example, there are non-Black people in Milwaukee who will say y'all. We're in Northern City, why are we saying y'all? It's because it's stemming from AAVE. And so for me, I say y'all in real life, I say it online. There's also other speech patterns that I might have from time to time, or words that I use. I don't really change the way that I speak in front of family versus friends. And it's kind of a nuanced discussion, because it's not like I would go up to this white kid in front of all of his Black friends and tell him to stop putting on an accent, because I don't think that's my place. I'm not Black. Like, what? Why would I do that? But once you're out of your neighborhood and you're online, you're a public figure, people are more able to critique the way that you're presenting yourself. And as Pinto says in this article, just because you're in proximity to a culture enough to be able to navigate it as an outsider, that doesn't mean that you get to apply this culture anywhere without critique. Lilly's lipstick collaboration with Smashbox, it was a red shade, it was called Boss, and that word is also used in the title of her first book. She claimed to coin this term actually, but it does stem from AAVE. She did not invent it. And so that's what makes her appropriation different than that white kid that I was talking about earlier with his friends. She is turning it into a product. It's a part of her brand. It's making her money. She's commodifying this culture that doesn't belong to her. So that's why when people influencers get called out, non-Black influencers get called out for having AAV, and they try to be like, well, I grew up, blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, but like, you need to have a little bit more of an examination here. Like, okay, but like, this is still important criticism for a reason. Let's try to reflect on this a little bit. And all these articles from writers of color are going to be in the description. I really want people to be able to understand this topic from different perspectives, because I think a certain perspective was extremely dominated during this time, and these voices were pushed to the wayside. All these articles were coming out at the time. This was not at the forefront of the conversation, because Lilly hates white men was the dominating factor. The commentary community was saying that Lilly was obsessed with these jokes at white men's expense, but instead they could focus on how Lilly herself does punch down. There was a controversy when Jessica Alba was on her show where they were making jokes about turbans, and she had to apologize for that. And then she also, in April of 2020, made this cover of Batman Forward, Batman Pull Up, which I'll play, I guess.
Along the real bad girl, them want dance and can't dance. How comes? Watch this, cause I do the bad girl pull up. Small skinny thing, show the man them what up. Make the top bounce if your belly full up. No matter your size, let me see you turn up. All the girl on the left, bad girl pull up. All the girl on the right, bad girl pull up.
Yeah, it's really cringe. But she received a lot of backlash from this. And this was also not something that major commentary channels talked about. And again, like, also I can understand, like, it not being your place to really talk about, but I think it's important to mention. Like, here I am mentioning this. It's not like I'm speaking on behalf of the people that wrote this article. I'm just trying to present their opinions, but obviously, like, I'm not speaking from direct experience. And speaking of that, in Stacey Lee Kong's article about this, she talks about the dynamics between how two marginalized communities, one can hold more privilege over another, which is definitely a blind spot for a lot of white people. I feel like a lot of, like, your average white person doesn't think about stuff like that. So I definitely recommend this, her article in particular that's in the description, to read about that. And it goes into a lot of detail about Indo-Caribbean and the Indian subcontinent and their relationship. TLDR, but you should read the article. It's not a great relationship that they have. Indo-Caribbeans are not accepted, or are often not accepted by Indians, and will experience discrimination. Plus, like all non-Black cultures in the world, anti-Blackness is deeply entrenched in Indian culture as well, which is further discussed in Shivani Economist's article on BLM and Indian allyship, and I'm going to read a quote from there. So the Indian community has a history and culture that promotes and at times even glorifies anti-blackness, from often implicit bias, whitewashing, to the likes of purity politics, casteist beliefs. Anti-blackness continues to be deeply entrenched in our socialization. And as far as I'm aware, in all of the interviews that I've seen, I didn't watch every single one that she's ever done, all the coverage of this is not something that is really talked about at all. It's not something that she's ever had to confront. These interviewers, they'll ask her about how the YouTube community was talking about how she hates white men and all of that, but they don't ask about this stuff. I couldn't even find her statement, if she made one, apologizing for the bad gal cringe ass video. I don't know if she made one. She did make a response to the Jessica Alba thing with the turbans. I couldn't find anything about the bad gal stuff, so sorry if there is something that I missed there. But outside of just a quick tweet, it's not really something that she has had to dive into that much. And these critiques didn't make it into any commentary videos either. The Right Opinion did mention that she was criticized by the demographics that she was probably trying to attract with her content, but it doesn't really go into much detail. And only one of these articles that I'm linking, the first one, is from like a American household name piece of media, which is Teen Vogue. And Teen Vogue has always had like really good coverage on issues like this, especially in the last like maybe like 8 to 10 years, maybe a little bit less than that. But yeah, when you're a white commentary channel and you're doing commentary on someone who looks different from you and you're critiquing them, there is a very important line to toe, which again, like I said, this is something that I have learned in my personal life. And I hope that I've illustrated to you that I don't believe that marginalization shields you from criticism. In Lily's case, the frankly inconsequential problems with her late night show overshadowed several important conversations that could have happened surrounding Lilly. That when we're looking at the composition of this video that I have, so much of the beginning was about all of this random crap that she was receiving. Some of it valid criticism, some of them had critiques on like the format of her show and how she could improve and stuff like that, which valid. That's just not what I was talking about today, because we're talking about some of the critiques that I have. And then the part of the video where I am describing some of the valid critiques that people had from marginalized communities is like this big, and that's just because it did not receive the same media attention as all of this other stuff. And that is something that we need to talk about. And I mean, I was right there with everyone at the time. I'm sure I was watching these videos and I like agreed with the things that was being said. I probably did watch the J. Aubrey video at the time, but I don't remember what I thought about it at the time. I do remember thinking, oh, her cringe late night show. Like I said, I liked Amanda's video. I'm pretty sure I had also rewatched that before researching for this video. And my second rewatch, I didn't think anything of it. So like I was right there with anybody. So I'm not making this video to be like, oh, I'm so smart and I have it all figured out, and these commentary channels are just bad at their job for not doing it right. That's not what I'm saying. I am using this as a way to reflect or to promote reflection about commentary and how we approach discussions and stuff like that. The podcast called You're Wrong About has had such a profound impact on me and how I see the world and all this stuff. It's really changed my approach for a lot of this stuff. And I think just growing, becoming older, and having more life experience has done that as well. But I think the takeaway here is that diversity is essential in media. All media, from commentary channels to late night talk shows to the media outlets that cover everything in between and the drama between both and all of that. I think another takeaway though is like, what did we gain from this? What was the true purpose of the content that was made at the time? Because a lot of people were like, I don't want to see Lilly fail. What was the purpose of the video then? And then how can we approach these discussions in the future? According to white YouTube, specifically, Lilly's greatest crime is not being able to handle criticism. But I have a question for the commentary community. Can you handle criticism? I hope all of that made sense. Like I said last time, I really was not expecting it to be this long. So I guess we'll see when I'm done editing this how long it ends up being, but I hope you enjoyed. I've been really enjoying creating things again. If you're not familiar, I used to make astrology content on Twitter a lot for years. It was at like the worst time in my life though, and I think just the trauma and being burnt out, and it kind of soured me on creating anything at all for a while. It was very hard for me to get through writer's block and this creative block that I've had. But I feel back and I feel great. So I'm just really glad that it's being noticed a little bit, because literally I was expecting 10 views, and maybe this video will get 10 views, who knows. I just enjoy the process of putting everything together. And I've been able to write, which has really been great for me. So yeah, shout out to the YouTube algorithm for recommending my video to so many people, my last video. I looked at the analytics, and more than 50%, it was like 60 to 80% of the clicks were from recommendations from YouTube, which is amazing, because I always thought that it would be impossible to kind of break into the YouTube algorithm. I really was not expecting it at all. And so any views above 1 is great for me. But yeah, so thank you. If you want to see what I have next, you can subscribe. Some people did without me even prompting them in the last video. I didn't do any calls to action in the last video because I was not expecting anything. And a lot of you liked the video as well. So if you want to like this one, if you like the format, you can give it a like. And yeah, I haven't decided on what my next topic is going to be. I am going to do like not a deep dive, but like a quick video about the Christy Carlson Romano stuff. Just like some updates, because if you saw my pinned comment on the last video, Allison Stoner was unvulnerable, like literally the day after I uploaded that. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, but that's not going to be a deep dive. I want to upload a deep dive like this maybe once every other week. And then maybe I'll have some shorter, more random videos in between. So that should be out soon. I just have to figure out the format that I want to do for it. But I do, like I mentioned in this video, sometimes I post what I'm researching about, and just my general thoughts about a lot of things on Twitter if you're interested in that. The @ is the same as it is here. And I don't really post on Instagram or TikTok that much. Maybe eventually. Hello. This is Marnie, by the way. I named her after the main character of Halloween Town. And sometimes she'll be making appearances. So I should probably edit this so that I can get it out, because I wanted this to be up on Friday, but now it's gonna be late, but that's fine. Anyway, I will see you with whatever next project I end up doing. And yeah, bye.